Hi everybody, we're going to start looking at some fractions in this module, and I want everybody to take a deep breath because I know sometimes when people say fractions, people panic because this is very few of our favorite course in high school math, but this is just something that we can do. We can all work through this together. This is very simple fractions that we're going to be dealing with in this course. So the first thing we need to know is that to work with fractions, we need to understand how to reduce them to lowest terms. And we also need to know how to create common denominators so that we can add and subtract them. Because the numerator is the number on the top. It shows how many pieces of the whole, which is the denominator, the number on the bottom, that you're dealing with. And so you cannot add them until the denominator, the number on the bottom, matches up, and you can't subtract them either. That same rule applies. So the first thing we're going to look at is reducing fractions to their lowest term, which just means that there is no other number besides 1 that they could both be divided by. So the first fraction that we have is 18/24. And so immediately we should see that these are even numbers. They're both even numbers. So that means if nothing else, they're both divisible by 2. Now, I will tell you, as you practice over time, you may recognize that both of these numbers are divisible by 6. And so if you divide 18 by 6, you're going to get 3. And if you divide 24 by 6, you're going to get 4. And so the only divisor they share is 1. So that is actually your fraction in the lowest term. But if you can't immediately go there, that is okay. What we can do is, again, we see they're both even numbers, so we know we can divide them both by 2. And if we divide 18 by 2, we get 9. If we divide 24 by 2, we get 12. So now we're working with smaller numbers. And again, we can look at 2, but we see 9 is not an even number, so it's not going to be divisible by 2 evenly without a remainder. So we try 3, and yes, you can divide 9 by 3 and get 3. You can divide 4 by 3 and 12 by 3 and get 4. So yes, you see that you have the correct fraction. If you need to take those extra steps as you practice, as you learn, that is absolutely okay. We just got to get to that lowest term whichever way we can. Okay, we have another one that's similar. We have 45/60. Okay, again, you might be able to tell immediately that both of those are divisible by 15. And then if you divide 45 by 15, you're going to get 3. And if you divide 60 by 15, you're going to get 4. Same, it reduces to the same. You see that. But if you cannot do that, what are some hints here? We see 5 and 0, and we know that any number that ends in a 5 or a 0 is divisible evenly by 5. So if you divide 45 by 5, you're going to get 9. If you divide 60 by 5, you're going to get 12. So we're right back where we were up here. And again, we get 3/4. So you get the same thing. So that is just a real brief explanation on reducing to lowest terms. Now we are going to have to look at finding a common denominator, because you see we are dealing with fractions, 2/3 plus 3/8, that we're meant to add these two together, and they do not have a common denominator. So you have to figure out what multiple to use to get them to numbers that match, okay? What can you multiply both these numbers by and end up with the same number? And with these two numbers, it is actually you multiply them by themselves, because 3 times 8 is 24. And that is not always true. It's not going to be true in the next one. I will show you. But that number is the number that we need to use for the denominator for this problem. And then you need to go back to your numerator and look at how you came up with 24 from 3. And you came up with it by multiplying it by 8. So you need to do the same thing here. And that's going to give you 16. And you got to 24 from this 8 by multiplying it by 3. So you need to do the same thing here. And that's going to give you 9. So now instead of 2/3 plus 3/8, which you cannot do, you have 16/24 plus 9/24. And you are going to get 25/24, which you should notice is what we call an improper fraction, because you're numerator cannot be larger than your denominator because that means you have more parts than you have a whole. So what you do to reduce that is you divide your numerator by your denominator, and in this case it will go into it equally one time, and you have one remainder, which becomes your numerator, and your denominator stays the same. So the actual reduced version of this problem is 1 and 1/24. Okay, now we're going to have 5/6 minus 1/4. And again, you cannot subtract those because the denominator is not the same. But in this instance, you will not just multiply them by together to get the denominator. You could, but then you're going to have some unnecessary reducing at the end. What you're going to do is see that these both can equal 12, right? You can multiply both of these numbers by something and end up with 12. So that is actually going to be your lowest common denominator is 12. And how did you get that 6 to 12? You got that by multiplying it by 2. So 5 times 2 is going to be 10. The 4 you got to 12 by multiplying it by 3. So you're going to multiply the 1 by 3, which is going to give you 3. And if you subtract that out again, remember the denominator does not change. You're only subtracting your numerator. You're only adding your numerator. Your denominator does not change in addition and subtraction. So 10 minus 3 is 7. Now, if you think way back to prime numbers, you will know that 7 is a prime number. So it can only be divided by 1 and itself, okay? Because 7 times 1 is the only multiplication fact that equals 7. So it is absolutely already in its lowest form, so you do not need to do anything else. Okay, guys, I hope that helps. If you need any more help, please reach out to me.